Good morning, you guys. It's your boy Bill Mahari here, represent Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the entire basketball community. If you want more basketball content, tune in to Basketball Conversations every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time. It's where we discuss basketball-related topics, news, debates, and everything else in the world of basketball. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon to get all the latest notifications when I start dropping videos and live streams. So, this is the beginning of a new week. We got the playoffs on the way too, and we're going to line up some more morning historical perspective videos. Okay. Now, this one is a response video that Too Raw for TV did last week, and he was reflecting about the career of Bill Russell. Now, for me, I'm going to give you guys my 2 cents about Bill Russell. Okay, and obviously the accomplishments speak for itself. But the thing with Bill Russell is that Bill Russell is the greatest winner in the history of basketball. I mean, when you look at what his accomplishment entails when he was in San Francisco in college and what he did for the Boston Celtics, speaks volumes to how dominant of a player that he was in his position. A guy that's came in at 6'10", 215 pounds, and dominating the defensive position. Now, remember, the Celtics were one of the best offensive teams during the 50s, but were very weak on the defensive side. And the Celtics, who were very good at drafting during that period, led by Red Auerbach, basically drafted Bill Russell when basically made a draft day trade during the 65 draft. All right, when they basically Boston, shipped basically shipped Ed McCalculey to the St. Louis Hawks for Bill Russell, and this was proved to be one of the greatest draft day trades in the history of North American sports. Ed McCackley really didn't do much in the NBA in all sincerity. He wasn't that much of a great player anyway. Actually take that back. He was a good player and made it to the Hall of Fame, but not as great as the impact that Bill Russell had. So the thing with Bill Russell, what he added to the Celtics is that he provided shot blocking and basically rebounding at a key position in the center position, right? Now remember, the Celtics were already knocking on the door of a championship before he came. But when he came in, with the Celtics, right? He pretty much averaged 14.7 points per game and basically led the league in rebounding with 19.6. All right. And when you were surrounded by basically with all the famous like Tom Heinsohn, Frank Ramsey, and guards of Bill Sharman and Bob Cousy, you know, they were pretty much a team to be reckoned with and helped lead the Boston Celtics to their first championship, the first of 11 championships during that period of time. All right, and the thing with Bill Russell is that Bill Russell was excellent at shot blocking, not at blocking your shot and sending it to the nosebleeds, right? But he would talk about how he would block the shot and basically block it to his guards to start the Celtic fast break. All right. When you had Bob Cousy leading your fast break, what did he do? He would block the shot and block it to either Bill Sharman or give it to Bob Cousy to start the fast break. Right. Basically, he was the kind of guy that really changed the game in terms of defensive innovations of what you can do. Right. He was excellent, on ball defender and excellent shot blocker. Right. The thing what I love about Bill Russell is that he would always slide in some little jabs at his opponent. Not trash talking, but he would say, "Hey, it's kind of getting hot in here, huh?" You know, he was excellent in terms of the psychology of understanding his opponents and basically getting inside of their heads. Right? He was very much excellent in terms of that particular aspect. Right? And he was the kind of player that averaged about a dozen consecutive seasons of 1,000 rebounds, right? And he's second all time in total rebounds and rebounds per game behind his rival, Will Chamberlain. I'm going to get into that rivalry in a few minutes. The thing that I really respect with Bill Russell was that he was the kind of player that was just not a winner off the court, but he was a winner off the court, right? He was one of the greatest pioneers in terms of using his platform to stand up for civil rights. The things that I've read over the years about what he went through in Boston is just unbelievable. I remember one story that stuck out to me was that there was a time where he was living in his house, right, and he came back home, and his yard was basically defecated with trash. And basically somebody left a note and basically said, you know, leave our neighborhood, you N-word. These were these things and more is the kind of stuff that Bill Russell held on throughout his entire time in Boston, right? Why do you think that he didn't? Why do you think that he didn't want to, have any type of relationship with the city of Boston? He loved the Celtics. He loved red. He loved his teammates, right? But the racism and all the stuff that he went through in Boston is unbelievable, right? There's a reason why he pretty much didn't want anything to do with Boston. That's why he retired his number privately. He didn't attend his Hall of Fame induction, right? He basically was wanted to wash his hands away from Boston, and you can't blame him for that. All right, he was the kind of man that was always on front and center, speaking up for black people at a time when a time where black rights was very much crap, right? He stood up for basically for civil rights, racial equality. Him and Muhammad Ali, and then at the time Jim Brown were kind of the people that were leading the charge in terms of pushing for civil rights. And it's really nice to know that he finally earned the Medal of Honor to pretty much the work that he did for the Presidential Medal of Freedom for both of his accomplishments and his tremendous work in the civil rights movement. Right? There's no doubt that he is a true pioneer and he belongs at a different level above everyone else in the realm of sports. Now I'm going to talk about his perspective on the game, right? What I see against Bill Russell, right? The one thing that I always saw to say about Bill Russell was is that sure, the only rival that he pretty much was, you know, Will Chamberlain. Will Chamberlain was a phenomenal athlete. You could even hear I've read stories where he pretty much can dunk the ball from the free throw line, right? He was a guy that can dominate the game in very much aspects, right? And there were times where during regular season games that Wilt Chamberlain had dominant games against Bill Russell when he had maybe 45 or 50 points a game. The thing that what Bill Russell did very well was is that he allowed Bill Russell to get his points off, but then late in the game, take away his post position spots, make him take tougher catches off of his comfortable areas, and make his work in the paint much more uncomfortable, right? So I really look at Bill Russell as is that an excellent team defender and great on ball defender. If he were playing in today in basically in the center position during the 80s and early 90s, he would have some partial success against guys that are basically do not like that don't bang as much. But if you're talking about going against a Shaquille O'Neal or somebody like that, I think he would have a tough time dealing with that. Now, it is mentioned that Robert Parrish did talk about how, you know, that Shaq may have been the most athletic center that he ever faced, but wasn't particularly the most strongest center, right? Now, I too believe that Bill Russell would try to orchestrate a defense to try to take away his dominant low post spots. May Shaq and Wilt to catch the ball off the top of the key and try to make them take shots a bit far away from the basket, right? The other thing that I also remember too was that they were great friends. I remember reading stories where Bill Russell would, invite Will Chamberlain to his house to serve him dinner, and then afterwards, days later, when they face each other, Will Chamberlain was always on the losing end against Russell and the Celtics. And I'm looking at that, I'm like, if I were Will, I would not do anything with Russell. I would not, come over to his house. I would not hang out with him. I'm not doing any of that stuff. But those are the things that Will fell for. And, you know, and Bill Russell was the excellent person in terms of psychology and basically getting into his mind of the opponent. And he did a phenomenal job of doing that against, Will Chamberlain. Now, it is worth noting that the fact that he was the one guy that was the important player for the Celtic dynasty. Now, yes, he had Hall of Famers on his team, right? He had pretty much guys like Bob Cousy. You had John Havlicek. You had Frank Ramsey. You had Tom Heinsohn, the Jones brothers, Sam and Casey Jones, right? You had Tom Sanders. You had Don Nelson. All of these guys are Hall of Famers, right? But let's be honest in this perspective, okay? If Bill Russell was not on that team, they don't win those championships, okay? Even when the Celtics replenished their talent during the 60s, right? They don't win those championships without the presence of Bill Russell in the interior, right? He was the guy that pretty much was the anchor of their defense, okay? The guy won MVP with one MVP 5 times, right? He was pretty much a guy that you had to respect at both ends of the floor, okay? He was pretty much a guy that was driven to be the best to be the best player and be the greatest winner in the history of basketball, right? And so I sometimes tend to say that Bill Russell was not a dominant offensive force. His defense is just top notch. And if they would have counted block shots during the 60s and 70s, he'd be the all-time leader in block shots. Right now, Akeem Olajuwon is at the top, is basically the number one leader in block shots all time. But if you ask me, if they would have counted block shots back in them days, in the 60s and in the 70s, he would have been the all-time leader in block shots. He created the block shot and made it into an art form, right? And the thing that I will always forever respect about Bill Russell is that he was the kind of guy that was this guy that wasn't going to give you much, but always gave everything that he had. In fact, I even remember watching a DVD when Tom Hudson talked about how before games, Russell would be physically ill, either by nervousness or some sort of illness. We don't know, but he was always coming there, with stomach pains. And then Red Auerbach would pretty much tell him, go to the bathroom and basically throw up. And then when he was done, he was ready to play and gave everything that he had. That's the kind of sacrifice and that was the kind of commitment that Bill Russell always gave to his team every single night. It is worth mentioning that it basically took decades until 1996 or 97 that pretty much that he was welcomed back to open arms in Boston and re-retiring his number. Because remember, as I told you before, the racism that he was going through in Boston when he was playing, that's why he never really you know embraced Boston as a city, because he knew the racism that was going on at the time. And so I don't blame him at all. There were times where he refused to sign autographs and refused to give anything to the media because he saw their BS. He saw all the racial double standards that come with it. Because the Celtics. The surprising thing was the Boston Bruins, who were a terrible team during that time, sold out more games than the Boston Celtics. And when it came to press coverage, Bob Cousy was receiving much more of the credit than Russell did. If I were Russell, I would have been mad. I would have held that kind of resentment against the city of Boston because they were not revering to black people, and it still goes on even today. And so I tend to believe that all these things played into account why he held that kind of resentment against Boston for the longest time, and it almost took almost an entire decade, and I should say entire decade up until 1999, when they finally re-retired his jersey number in front of a huge crowd at the Fleet Center in Boston. And so at the end of the day, Russell, may not be the most complete player that you'll ever find as a center, but what he was able to do in terms of this defense, rebounding, psychology of the game, he is at the top of the list. You don't win 11 championships if you don't know how to play and don't know how to be a great athlete and understand how to play psychological games with your opponent. That's how dominant and that's how ferociously competitive he was as a basketball player. And you know, the thing that I always will put in high regard with Bill Russell you know, he was the greatest winner in the history of basketball and helped revolutionize the game in the center position and made defense an art form. All right. That's how I kind of see about Bill Russell. But tell me what you guys think in the comment section.